appearance tomorrow, only in writing, 977B, Penal Code. Mr. DeGuerin is handing me the executed waiver. I told the council that one juror has a telephone appointment. We'll start late for her on June 1. We'll start at 10:30. I got to confirm that she can do it here by cell phone. Otherwise, 10:30 isn't going to give her enough time. But right now, that's my understanding. So June 1, 10:30. We'll start at 10:30.
And will you explain to the jurors tomorrow why Mr. Durst is absent and is making a medical appointment?
If that's the way you want me to put it, sure.
Your Honor, I would.
How about he can't be with us today?
Yeah, correct. Through no fault of his own, Mr. Durst cannot be with us today without explaining what it's about.
Okay.
Your Honor,
Yes?
I would ask that the jury be told that Mr. Durst is absent as a result of the doctor's appointment. Just saying that he's not here, if he's on trial in a murder case, would be more appropriate to explain to the jury his absence, because it's highly unusual.
You folks leave no detail to out. I guess that's why you're able to read such good stipulations. I will meditate upon your request.
You're unmuted.
Jurors, yes. I'm willing to waive my appearance in court tomorrow to May 26th. I understand you have the right to be here and you give up that right in order to be here, as you said in writing? You understand that you have a right? Yes. He's giving me the thumbs up affirmative. That's good. He's ratified this. That's acceptable. Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to Department 1. All jurors are present. Mr. Durst is present with his lawyers. Mr. Lewin is present. And while counsel converse about finishing touches on a stipulation, can you believe they agree about things? They really do. It's amazing. But they're have reached another agreement. So I've got a... You've got an appointment, and if we start at 10:30 on that day and give you time? Can you do that by phone from here, or do you need to travel from somewhere else?
No, it's video, so I could potentially do it here. Sit in my car and do it.
So you could do your that appointment, and then we could start at on that day at 10:30, and you'd have enough time to do it. All right. So I just had a dialogue with juror in seat number 16, and so on June 1 we're gonna start a little later. I'll let you know ahead of that, but we'll have a late start on June 1, 10:30 instead of 9:15. And with that, and again for another juror, we are going to break a little early so she can make an appointment. And you got a hand up there? TV on. We need that TV on if you're showing a TV. Excellent. Excellent. All right.
You want to get the witness, Your Honor?
Please.
Dr. Paula Marcus, Your Honor.
come stand in the witness stand? Please raise your right hand. Do you solemnly state that the testimony you're about to give and the cause now pending before this court shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I
So
do.
help you God.
I do.
Please be seated. Please state and spell your first and last name.
Paula Marcus, P is in Paula, A-U-L-A, M-A-R-C-U-S.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. And please speak directly into the microphone. With
Sure.
our masks, we often need to talk right into it in
Okay.
order to be audible.
Probably extra loud, Dr. Marcus, because I know I could hardly hear you, so I'm not sure if the jury would able to hear much. Yeah. All right. Dr. Marcus, what is your current occupation?
First and foremost, I'm a grandma, and I am semi-retired psychiatrist. I'm on the faculty of the Albert Einstein College of Medicine. I teach there, and I still have a couple of patients.
And can you tell me what kind of education do you have? And still, I think if you can talk even louder, maybe.
Okay. I'm sorry, what education I've had?
Education. I don't think it's picking up on the mic.
You can twist, bring that mic up, you can twist it up and talk right into it.
Is that better?
That's much better if you
Okay.
keep that.
The jurors need to hear you, so if you see them glaring at you at points in time, they're at the back of my head. They might glare at me all the time, but I can't see them.
Okay.
So you can actually see them, so if you can kind of watch when you're saying, if it looks like they can hear you, great. Okay, you were going to explain your education.
So I have a MD degree from the Albert Einstein College of Medicine, and I had a 4-year post medical school psychiatric residency, and then a year of a fellowship in geriatric psychiatry.
And doctor, in terms of your professional experience, what year did you start and graduate from Einstein Medical School?
1982,
That's when you finished. When did you start?
1978,
And are you still affiliated with Einstein Medical School?
yes.
And have you been affiliated with them in one way or another since 1978?
Yes.
When I say the name Kathy Durst, is that somebody that you knew?
Yes.
And can you tell me how the two of you met?
Well, we all met each other the first day of medical school.
Were the
So-
two of you in the same class?
We were in the same class, yes.
And when you say all of us, just meaning the medical school classmates,
Yes.
approximately how large was your medical school class per year?
It was under 200. I think it was 180, something like that.
And that would be,
Okay, we got a juror needs a.
Oh, sorry,
Okay, one moment. Make it, yeah.
doctor, with medical school being 4 years, does that mean that roughly about 200 people in each of those classes? Or does that mean the total that are in
Yeah,
all of Einstein?
there's about 100, or at least there were, about 180 students in each class. But I mean, sometimes we would know students in other years, but mostly we just kind of knew, at least I can say for myself, I mostly knew people from in my class.
And in terms of Kathy Durst, what do you remember about her? Just let us know when you're ready.
So Kathy had long blonde hair, and she was very outgoing. And she was a very nice person. She was very smart. And I think she was a happy person.
Did you know it when you first met her, soon thereafter, did you know if Kathy was married?
I think we kind of all, anyone that you would know, as soon as pretty quickly.
So you ended up being made aware that she was married. Did you know that she was married to an individual named Robert Durst?
I did.
And do you recall if you ever met Robert Durst?
I did.
Do you remember how many times?
At least once, possibly more times than that.
And is it fair to say that your contact with him was pretty minimal?
Well, time-wise, yes, but not impactfully.
Do you recall if at the time Kathy spoke to you, and I'm not asking what you said, I'm just asking, did she speak to you about the status of her marriage with Bob Durst?
No.
And if I were to ask you, based on your acquaintance with Kathy, would you describe her as somebody who was very outgoing in terms of sharing her personal life, or somebody who was more private?
I really can't characterize that.
Were you aware when you knew her, and I'm asking from personal knowledge yourself, or from something Kathy told you, were you aware of any domestic violence in the marriage? And again, I'm only asking either what Kathy told you or what you observed yourself.
If I observed myself?
No. So I'm not asking, did you hear something? I'm simply saying, did either Kathy mention domestic violence to you in her marriage, or did you ever see any domestic violence in her marriage?
No.
Did that ever change in terms of your knowledge about her marriage? Did you personally observe any other information about domestic violence in Kathy Durst as the years went on? You met her first year until she disappeared fourth year?
Can you give me the definition of domestic violence?
Well, so I'm asking you, let's back up a second. Did you observe yourself in interactions involving Kathy and Bob Durst?
I'm sorry, between her and her husband?
Did you observe any personal interaction at any time
Yes.
between Kathy and Bob Durst?
And her husband, yes.
Yes. And you are a trained psychiatrist, is that correct?
Yes.
Do you have experience in your training and in your practice in dealing with relationships between couples?
Yes.
And is that a small amount of experience or a large amount of experience?
Large.
And can you tell me, in observing the dynamic between Bob Durst and Kathy Durst, what did you personally observe?
What I have the basis of knowledge, Your Honor, with only seeing her maybe one or more time.
Sustained.
Basis.
The objection would be,
Sustained. You need to lay a foundation before you get it more specific.
All right.
General to more specific.
All right, how many times do you think you saw Bob and Kathy Durst interact?
Definitely once.
And the one time that you are referring to, was that an interaction that was memorable for you?
Yes.
And is the basis of your opinion regarding the interaction, is it based on that interaction that you personally observed?
Yes.
Can you please describe what you observed?
I don't think you
place.
can.
Time and place.
That's not an objection, Your Honor. It's a
Well,
question. He can clear it up on cross if you'd like.
No, I think there's a vagueness about it. Why don't you establish, when did you observe them?
I'm happy to do that. Do you recall when that interaction was that you
Yes.
observed? When was that?
It was sometime between 1978 and 1981.
So it would either be, you started, your first year was 1978, correct? Yeah, oh, you need to
Yes.
answer.
Yes, I'm sorry.
I
Yes.
see you nodding, the court reporter has to get it down.
Yes.
And 1981 would have been your third year, is that correct?
Yes.
And can you please describe that interaction?
It's an academic year, so it's sort of your third. The academic year starts in July. So the first academic year is 78 to 79, 79 to 80, 80 to 81, and then 81 to 82. And now I've forgotten the question, sorry.
So, to the best of your memory, when do you think you made this observation with respect to your time at?
My best guess would be 1980.
And can you describe what that interaction was?
Yes, my husband and I were walking down a street in New York City, and we met Kathy and her husband, and we chatted a little while, and before we could really say much else in terms of just chatting, her husband told me what they were going to be doing.
And what was it about that interaction that struck you?
I think the way I felt about it was that he was preempting any kind of interaction that we.
Not responsive.
I believe it's absolutely responsive.
Overruled.
I'm sorry?
I have overruled the objection, and you may answer.
I felt that his statement was a preemptive statement to kind of like cut off any further interaction.
And Dr. Marcus, have you seen that in relationships involving couples where one part of the couple attempts to dominate or control the other?
Yes,
And is that how you took that interaction?
yes,
And is this something, again, that you have seen in your practice over the years?
yes.
I want to ask, I'm going to go to a different area. In the early 1980s, late 1970s, was it unusual for a medical student to call in sick to a rotation?
No.
It was not unusual.
I'm sorry, it wasn't, I've never heard of such a thing.
Okay, so I want to back up because I think you misunderstood my question.
Okay.
You said not unusual. Go ahead.
Yes. In the
Yeah,
ear-
that's like two double negatives, I didn't understand what you're saying.
Okay, let me ask again. In the early 1980s or late 1970s, was it unusual for a medical student to call in sick to a rotation? Was it unusual?
Very, yes.
In your experience, how sick would the medical students that you knew at Einstein have to be to call in sick, especially for the first day of a rotation?
One would have to, look, this is obviously my feeling and my observation, so I don't know that I can characterize this as, but doctors and medical students don't let themselves off when they're not feeling well. We take Tylenol or Advil or whatever it is, unfortunately, and we keep going unless, as what happened to me once was that I started vomiting while I was in the hospital and working, so I had to leave, and then the next day I let the intern that I worked with know that I wasn't coming in.
But you were sick, went into the hospital, vomited, and then were sent home?
Well, I don't remember when I started feeling sick. I didn't go to work vomiting, no, but I started to feel very ill and started to throw up while I was in the hospital working.
Is that the only time, let me back up, did you ever call in sick to a rotation in medical school?
Well, I don't know what my answer is that I let the person who was my immediate supervisor know that I was not coming back after he already knew that I had left because I signed out to him and I was throwing up.
Was that during medical school or during residency?
Medical school.
And any other time that you can recall other than that? And let me ask you, was that just you that had that kind of standard with respect to calling in?
No, it's a very common phenomenon, I think.
So I'm going to ask you to wait until the question is completed before you answer.
I'm
and that's
sorry.
because this is not an audio recording, but this is actually being manually recorded by a stenographer.
Okay.
So if you'll pause before you.
Okay.
Thank you.
So what I was going to ask you was the attitude you described, was that something unique to you, or was that the culture at Einstein in the late 70s and early 80s?
It was the culture.
Let me ask you, by the time a medical student was in the last few months of medical school, were they depended upon to actually work by the services that they were rotating through?
Yes.
I want to ask you, in your experience, who would a medical student contact if they were not going to be able to make it into a rotation?
I really don't recall if there were beepers back then, but there certainly were no cell phones. So I kind of assume that we beeped somebody.
Oh, and let me ask you, I'm not inquiring how you did it. I'm asking, so let's assume that you're going to be starting at the, you're going to be doing a pediatric clinic. Are you following me so far?
Yes.
And you're due to show up at that pediatric clinic. Let's assume that you are sick. Who would you expect that would be called?
That I would call?
Yes.
I might call another medical student who's on that same rotation with me and let them know, to the service would be the intern you're working with, the resident, and the attending.
So
They know.
would you direct your contact to somebody on that service that was expecting you to work?
Absolutely.
And any doubt about that in your mind?
No.
Let me ask you, in your experience, would it be out of the ordinary for a medical student to call a dean to report they were going to be ill and not call anyone on the service that they were supposed to report to?
I do not know why anyone would do such a thing, no.
And if I were to ask you on a scale of of 0 to 100, with 0 being, I absolutely cannot imagine a scenario where that could ever happen, and 100 being, oh yes, that's absolutely typical, what would be your response?
99.9.
So 99.9, which I think, let me go through listen carefully to the scale that I gave you. Are you ready? So my question is, if I were to ask you on a scale of 0 to 100, with 0 being there is no way that a student would call the dean and not call the rotation, and 100 being, oh yes, they would absolutely call the dean and I could see them not calling the rotation, which would it be?
You know, I'm sorry, but I don't know if, I'm sorry, but are you asking me about my surety? How sure I would be that that would be correct?
What, no, so I'll do that in a second, so let me back up. So this is my question, are you ready?
Yep.
And we'll just start here. On a scale of 0 to 100, 0 meaning nearly, I cannot imagine a scenario where that would happen, and 100 being, oh yes, I absolutely would expect that. What would be your position on whether or not a medical student would call the dean, a dean at the medical school, hold on, and not call someone at their rotation?
Infinitesimal.
Okay. Infinitesimal meaning close to 0 or close to 100?
Very close to 0.
Okay. Now, I'm going to ask you, how certain are you of that opinion?
100% sure.
I want you to assume the following hypothetical. So I want you to assume all these facts. Are you ready? A fourth-year medical student a few months away from graduating and becoming a physician has a rotation in an area of specialty and at a hospital that they are interested in applying to for residency. Are you understanding so far?
Yes.
On the first day of that rotation, the student calls in sick at or near the time or after the time that they were due at the rotation, and instead of calling the rotation itself or the department at the hospital that is in charge of that rotation, they instead call a dean at the medical school to report the absence. If I were to ask you, what is your response as to the likelihood of that scenario?
Ludicrous.
And again, if I were to ask you, on a level of absurdity, how absurd or ludicrous would that hypothetical be?
Very.
I want to ask you further. You knew Kathy Durst, correct?
Yes.
Knowing Kathy and as a young woman yourself at the time, do you believe that a young medical student would have called a male dean, an older male dean, and told him that she was unable to report to a rotation that he was not a part of because of a headache, diarrhea, and cramps?
No.
It's called speculation.
And can you tell me, when you say no, why?
There are over-the-counter medications that help with diarrhea, and if you don't think you have Campylobacter or something that you really don't want to take that for, yes, you would take something to control your diarrhea. For the headache, you would take a Tylenol, and for cramps, it would depend on where those cramps were.
In terms of the perception, as that time young female medical student yourself, and knowing Kathy, would you expect that Kathy would have referred to her condition allegedly in that manner instead of, as an example, saying I'm having a gastrointestinal issue, etc.?
She would not have done that.
And can you again explain why?
First of all, cramps doesn't mean anything. You can have muscle cramps, you can have abdominal cramps, you can have cramps for a menstrual period. You know, that it's a general word that doesn't describe a particular part of your body or any particular issue.
And let me stop you, doctor. As a medical student, almost a doctor, is that the way that almost doctors spoke in your experience?
Never, no.
I want to ask you, I want you to assume that during Kathy's time at medical school and during some of her rotations, she was being emotionally and physically abused at home by her husband. So I want you to assume that now for this question. In your opinion, do you think that would have likely interfered with her ability to successfully complete some of her medical school coursework and rotations?
Do I think that it, I'm sorry, can you repeat that?
I'm basically asking you, if someone is a victim of domestic violence
Yeah.
while they're going to medical school,
Yeah.
would you expect that that kind of environment would negatively impact their ability to perform as well in their coursework and rotations?
I really have to say one would not know, because every individual responds to environmental stresses differently.
Let me ask you something. Would you agree, doctor, that in your experience, that medical school and going through rotations can be incredibly physically and emotionally demanding?
Yes,
Would you agree that under the best of circumstances that it challenges even people with supportive home environments?
you know, I think it's maybe the mask, but I didn't get that last couple
okay.
words.
Let me speak up. Would you agree that in a situation where someone is going through medical school and rotations, that even with the most supportive home life, it can be challenging?
Yes,
Would you further agree, doctor, that if someone were living in a situation where they were a victim of emotional and physical abuse, that you would imagine that that would certainly not be beneficial to the situation?
yes,
So your prior statement is simply, you don't know, people handle things differently, but that as a rule, that would certainly be an extra challenge for that kind of medical student.
yes.
Do you know anything about Kathy Durst and drug abuse or drug use?
I've only speculatively, not personally.
At times, she has been described by the defense as, quote, a coked out drug addict, unquote. Was that your experience?
That's not sustained, objection sustained.
On the
Form of the question,
form of the question.
Yes.
If
Leave
Kathy,
defense counsel out of it.
if Kathy Durst were described as a, quote, coked out drug addict, would that be consistent or inconsistent with your observations of Kathy Durst?
Totally ludicrous.
And can you tell me why?
There is no such thing. Doesn't exist.
And tell me what you mean by that.
A person cannot be a coked out, what was the description? Coked out
Coked out drug addict.
drug addict and function as a medical student. Now, again, this is all about definitions, because I can't tell you exactly how many people in my medical school class either tried cocaine or used it on a regular basis, but that did not equate those people as addicts or drugged out addicts, no.
By the way, did you ever see anything consistent in terms of your observations with Kathy Durst being under the influence of cocaine?
Never.
How did you find out that Kathy had disappeared?
Instruction
Through,
about hearsay.
Over.
So I'm not asking, just so it's clear, I'm not asking you what did somebody tell you, I'm asking just how did you hear?
through the grapevine.
Okay. And did you hear about her disappearance before or after you graduated medical school?
Oh, right away, after she disappeared.
And can you tell me, what was the response at Einstein? I'm not asking what people said, I'm asking specifically, was there surprise, was there no surprise, was there shock? How would you describe it?
That calls for hearsay.
Sustained.
Your Honor,
You
you're
can
saying...
ask her how she reacted.
No, Your Honor, my question, I didn't ask for any statement, I asked what was the response? There's no statement.
No, I think it calls for hearsay.
I'll
It may
reword-
call for hearsay. Is there a way to answer that without using people's words?
Yes.
Is there a way for you to answer that without using people's words? If there is, you may answer.
May I ask the question again, Your Honor, so the witness can
Yeah.
remember what it was? I'm asking not what people said, but what was the general response at...
Horror,
Horror. Okay.
horror.
Horror. And let me just, I got to get the question out. So I know you know what I'm going to ask, but just so it's a clean record, let me ask the question fully and then you'll answer. So you ready? So what was the response at Einstein at the time that people found out that Kathy had disappeared?
Horror.
And can you explain, in addition to horror, was it also shock and surprise?
Leading.
Sustained.
Was there shock or surprise?
Leading.
That's not a leading question.
Overruled.
Yes,
Did you notice Kathy's absence at your graduation from medical school?
of course.
And in terms of your observations with Kathy, even in conversations that you had with Kathy, did she appear to be excited about becoming a doctor?
That's leading.
Overruled.
We all were.
And was Kathy one of those, including
Yes.
the we? Would the Kathy Durst you know, in your opinion, have disappeared, never to be seen again, so close to her medical school graduation?
Calls for an opinion. Leading.
Overruled.
It,
Do you remember the question?
no,
Okay. Would the Kathy Durst you know have disappeared, never to be heard from again, so close to her medical school graduation?
I'm sorry, I'm having a hard time understanding what you're asking me. Is this something, would I have, I'm sorry. Can you
The,
maybe
uh,
ask it a different way?
Sure.
Yeah, you're leaving out this idea of a willfulness or
I'll-
voluntariness,
I'll-
and yes, we all know she disappeared.
I'll
So
ask it
the question
again.
makes no sense, so
I'll-
add that.
I'll ask it again. Would the Kathy Durst that you know have voluntarily disappeared of her own accord so close to her medical school graduation?
Of course not.
And if I asked you, how certain are you of that assessment?
100%.
No further questions, Your Honor?
Cross-examination.
May I take a sip of water, John?
Yes, of course you may. Just pull down your mask and put it back up when you're done sipping. You may proceed.
Good afternoon, Dr. Marcus. My name is Dick DeGuerin, and I represent Bob Durst. I believe you said you saw Bob Durst one time or maybe more. Is that your testimony?
Yes,
And you're a psychiatrist, right? Or you were a practicing psychiatrist and now you're semi-retired.
yes.
The encounter that you had walking on the street with Mr. Durst, even though you were in medical school and not yet a full-fledged doctor or a psychiatrist, you would agree that that's a very little basis for making a judgment about somebody's personality, wouldn't you?
Yes.
All right. And
Was that a positive that I would or would not? The question was a positive you would?
Do you agree with him that that's a not a great basis for making that conclusion?
No, I don't agree with that at all, no.
you don't make snap judgment in your practice, do you?
I don't know how to answer that question.
He's asking if you make snap judgments, if you make
Well,
judgments with
you
little
have
data.
to as a doctor.
As a psychiatrist?
I'm a doctor, yes.
Doesn't it take several sessions with your patient
No.
as a psychiatrist to,
No, not at
generally
all.
speaking, if you let me finish, generally speaking, doesn't it take several sessions with your patient to come to a definitive diagnosis about that patient, and maybe sometimes more?
It can take years to come to a definitive diagnosis.
Okay, and so you said that you saw Bob Durst and Kathy Durst on a street in New York City, and I presume it was no longer than 10 minutes?
You're asking if the
The encounter was,
Yeah,
the encounter was no longer than 10 minutes?
I don't think so, no. I don't think it was longer than 10 minutes, no.
Okay. And from that, even before you were a full-fledged doctor, you made a diagnosis that he was controlling.
What diagnosis did I say? I don't remember making a diagnosis.
That he made a preemptive statement and that he was dominating in the relationship. Something of that, and that's not an exact quote, but that's about what you said, isn't it?
That's no diagnosis that I know of. Being domineering is not a diagnosis. It's either a trait, a personality trait, or...
So you decided from the 10-minute conversation that Mr. Durst was being domineering.
At that moment? You're asking me how that I made... I'm sorry, I'm not sure what you're asking me.
Well, what I'm doing really is questioning how you could make what I would call a judgment about their relationship from a 10-minute meeting on a street in New York City.
I never said that. I said that it was that was my perception of what was going on at that moment.
What was the statement about? What was it that he said that they were going to be doing?
Kathy and I are going to get some crabs.
Was it crab season?
I have no idea.
Okay. Was it near a fish market or near a seafood restaurant?
Well, it was in New York City, so probably, yeah.
Where in New York City?
Upper Manhattan.
Okay. For the members of the jury that don't know much about what Upper Manhattan is. Was it on one of the avenues? Was it in the 80s, in the 90s, and higher up than that? Where was it?
So,
And you would agree that in Upper Manhattan, there are avenues, first, second, third, and fourth, and some of them are named, such as Park Avenue or, and.
do I know that? I'm sorry,
Well,
what's
if
the
I'll finish,
question?
if you let me finish my question, please, ma'am. You do know, don't you, that the way Manhattan, in that part of Manhattan, Upper East Side is laid out, there are avenues that go north and south and streets that go east and west.
Yes,
The streets are numbered like in the 80s or 90s or so forth, and or 70s, and the avenues are numbered from first all the way over to Park,
yes.
or actually Fifth.
Well, depending on where you are, I mean.
Yeah, well, Fifth is on the east
You go to
side.
9th or 10th, but.
Well, you said Upper
avenues
East Side.
crisscross.
Excuse me. We're driving the court reporters. We're tiring the court reporters because we're talking at the same time. So it's not like a conversation.
Two without a.
No, he's testing your memory, so go ahead. It's fine.
So on the east side of the park, which is the Upper East Side of Manhattan, where in that area was it?
It was either on the east side or the west side of Upper Manhattan.
You would agree that there's a great deal of difference between whether you're on the east side of the park or the west side of the park, wouldn't you?
You're either on the east or the west.
Sure. And there's a great deal of difference, isn't there?
You're either east or west.
Okay. Where was it, if you know?
The exact spot?
Yes, ma'am. Or close.
If you remember.
I would have to be conjecturing. I really don't remember.
Where were you going, you and your husband?
We were most likely going to have a slice of pizza or something like that.
Did you live nearby?
Yes,
Where did you live?
I lived on the Upper West Side.
So does that help you in remembering that perhaps it was on the Upper West Side rather than on the Upper East Side?
No,
Okay, let's go to a different way. You were out walking to go get a pizza. That suggests that you were near your residence?
no.
Where did you start from?
Where did we come from? I really don't remember.
Where did you go after that?
After we had the pizza,
No, after you had the encounter with Mr. Durst and Kathy.
we went to eat.
When, if ever, did you see him again?
There were get-togethers, and was this person at this get-together or that get-together? I really don't remember if Mr. Durst was at any of those or not. Oh, and then the other thing that I recalled was that there was something called liver rounds at Jacoby Medical Center, which actually meant that somebody had brought in some food because at that time, in the late 70s and early 80s, it was a complete food desert, and you literally could not walk from the hospital to get food and get back. So you either had brought it with you or someone else brought it in. And my recollection is that Mr. Durst, I'm fairly certain that he was the person who paid for that food, for the liver rounds. And was he there in the hospital or not? I don't recall.
Okay. So what you're saying is there was an occasion when somebody brought in food for the students because they couldn't get it on their own on the street, and you think Mr. Durst paid for that. Is that right?
I can tell you that at that time, that's what I believe to be true. Yes.
Okay, but you don't know if you saw him then.
I don't know if I saw him.
So back to your characterization of him as being domineering, we're left with one 10-minute encounter on a street in Upper West Side Manhattan in 1978 or 9 or 80?
That was not a characterization. No, I did not make a characterization. I observed an interaction. That's what I did.
And the interaction was, Mr. Durst said, we're going to go get some crabs.
Yes.
All right. Okay. I want to talk to you now about your testimony that in answer to Mr. Lewin's hypothetical question about a student calling a dean if the student were sick and couldn't come to the beginning of a rotation. You recall that testimony? Several questions about that.
Yes.
I believe your testimony was that it was ludicrous to think that would happen.
Yes.
Let me ask you to assume a couple of things. Let's assume that Dr. Cooperman testified that he received a call on February the 1st from a person he believed to be Kathy Durst, who said she was too sick to start her rotation that started that day, and that she would not be in, and described various symptoms. And Dr. Cooperman said that under oath. Would you say that Dr. Cooperman was being ludicrous?
No, that's an argumentative question also.
Sustained.
Well, is it your opinion that Dr. Cooperman is ludicrous if he believed that?
Improper opinion,
Yeah.
also
Sustained.
argumentative.
Do you know what Kathy's relationship was with either Dean Cooperman or Dean Cook?
No.
Do you know who Dean Cook was?
Yes.
Who was he?
He was somebody who, when I was, the only time I had an individual interaction with him was when he interviewed me as to what field of medicine I wanted to pursue.
Did Dean Cook ever reach out to you to help you in some time of trouble?
No.
Would it be the place of a dean, assistant dean of students, to care about students and their welfare?
Well, I didn't feel that he did, no.
Is that some criticism of Dean Cook?
I can tell you what the conversation revolved around.
I'm not asking you about a conversation. What I'm asking you is that your statement about Dean Cook, that you didn't think he was caring,
He was not towards me,
not towards you.
no.
Was there some specific event in which he was not caring toward you? Well, let me ask it this way. Did you ever have problems in school such as that you wanted help from the administration, the deans?
Problems in school? I did ask Dr. Cooperman for help, yeah, but not,
Okay,
not specifically school-related, but something else.
okay, I'm asking about Dean Cook now. Dean Cook.
Yes.
John Cook.
Yes, I expected him to ask me about my interests in what field of medicine that I was going to pursue. That was what the premise of the meeting was, but he did not ask me that.
Would it be part of the dean's responsibilities to try to help students that had trouble?
Oh, I would think so, yeah.
I want to show you what's been marked and introduced as Defendant's Exhibit B, the first page of it.
May I take another sip of water? May I take another sip of water?
Yes, please, yes, you may.
I'm
No problem.
Can you read that?
It's right in front of you, too?
I understand from my office that things aren't going too smoothly for you right now. Would you like to talk to me? Do you think I can help? Sincerely, J.L. Looked like an E, but I guess it's a C.
Okay, and you see the letterhead, of course. Jean Cook, Assistant Dean of Students, right?
Yes,
And it's addressed to Kathleen Durst,
yes,
and it's dated March the 9th, 1981.
yes.
Did you ever get such a personal note from Dean Cook?
No,
And so I take it you did not have what this note may indicate, that is a personal relationship, not anything improper, but a personal relationship with Dean Cook.
Your Honor, that assumes facts not in evidence.
You may answer.
I don't see where, if you can help me, I don't see in this letter that it indicates a special, did you say a special relationship?
I said a personal
A
relationship.
personal relationship, I don't see where you're getting that from in this particular letter.
Would you like to talk to me? Do you think I can help? That's reaching out to Kathleen, apparently because he understands from his office that things aren't going too smoothly.
That is argumentative, assumes facts.
I'm reading it.
I wrote.
Your Honor, is Mr. DeGuerin allowed to give his opinion of what the
No,
letter
but he can
means?
pose it with a, do you agree, sort of question. Yes, he may.
The plain words indicate that Dr. Cook is reaching out to Kathleen Durst because he thinks she's troubled, right?
Yes,
Okay. Now, you mentioned also that you didn't think that a student would call the dean to opt out of a rotation. They would call the rotation or a student.
That misstates the testimony.
Sustain.
I'm not trying to put words in your mouth. My understanding of your testimony was that it was ludicrous to think that a student would call the dean if they weren't going to show up for class. That was your testimony, wasn't it?
That is again misstates testimony. Class.
Okay, class, rotation,
Okay.
They are different, so we would ask that he,
Yeah,
or
they're two different
clerkship.
things.
yeah, restate your question correctly.
Okay, class, rotation, or clerkship.
Now it's compound, so we would
Sustained.
ask,
Just say objection, compound.
objection compound,
Yes, sustained. No.
Class.
objection relevance as to class.
Sustained.
Jesus.
Was it your testimony that you thought it was ludicrous to believe that a student would call the dean if that student was too sick to go to a clerkship?
Yes,
Internship, but
Dean,
let it be.
It
keep
was
in
close,
mind,
so I didn't object, Your Honor. Close.
let me see if I can change it so I can get an objection from him.
Please don't.
It won't be hard.
Rotation would be a great word, Dick, if you use that one, I wanted to.
Please proceed.
Keep in mind what this note says, because I'm going to change the page on you and turn the page to the second page of Exhibit B. This is a record of the university. It's from Dr. Cook, Assistant Dean for Students, with apparently his signature, a handwritten name, dated the next day, 10 March, after the reaching out to Kathy. Miss Durst has withdrawn from the surgery clerkship for personal reasons effective today. You read that?
yes.
Let's put this together. Dean Cook, after sending this note to Ms. Durst, the next day tells the registrar that she's withdrawing from a clerkship for personal reasons, right?
Yes.
The question to you about being ludicrous to think that a student would call a dean if the student was too sick to go to a clerkship, doesn't it take a little bit different light if there's an established relationship between the dean and the student?
I'm afraid I feel like you're conflating two things.
I'm not asking you to criticize my question, I'm asking you
Your
a
Honor, I
question.
would ask that the witness be allowed to finish her answer before being interrupted. She was answering it, Mr. DeGuerin didn't like it, so he interrupted.
No, that's not true. What,
she
Your
be allowed
Honor,
to answer the
she
question?
was not being responsive.
No, it was responsive. The question, her answer was that your question conflated two things.
Can
Would you
she
like to
finish?
explore that further? He may explore it further. He may control the examination.
All right.
Or you may bring it out, Mr. Lewin, on redirect examination.
By the way, do you know Dr. Stephen Safyer?
Yes.
How do you know him?
I met him in 1978 and married him in 1981, and we've been together married almost 40 years now.
So the last witness, I suppose you know he was the last witness that preceded you.
Well, I know he was a witness this morning. I don't know if you had anyone after him or not. That I don't know.
Okay, so he's your husband,
He is.
and you were not in a place to see the rather contentious cross-examination of him, were you?
Was I in it? Did I see it?
Yeah, it's on national television.
No. I did not see it, no.
Okay.
National television's kind of a stretch, Your Honor.
Well, it's on court TV.
Yeah, I wasn't watching television.
Is it? Okay.
Technically,
Did you, I take it that you traveled here with him.
Yes.
I take it you talked about what you were coming up here for.
We've talked about Kathy for More than 40 years.
I didn't ask you that. I asked you about traveling up here with your husband.
Yeah.
I take it you talked about the case when you were traveling up here with your husband?
Yes.
Okay. So, I guess, let me cut short all this. Now that I've shown you that at least on one occasion, the dean of students, the assistant dean of students, John Cook, intervened for Kathleen Durst when she was having problems in the surgery clerkship. Doesn't that change your assessment that it would be ludicrous for a student to call the dean?
Neither of those letters say, to
Excuse
me
me, Your Honor,
anyway, I
not
don't
responsive.
see any,
Not responsive.
I don't see that.
Not
that
responsive,
he-
Your Honor.
That she
Your Honor,
called-
would you stop the witness?
Okay, don't, usually I hear the witness out and then I strike the answer and ask the jury to disregard it. When I hear the answer, then I can determine whether or not it is responsive. So, doesn't it change your assessment? So the question doesn't call for you to explain your answer. You may simply state whether or not it would change your answer. The follow-up question, either by this lawyer or by the lawyer for the people, would ask you to explain why. So,
Can you repeat the question,
Yes.
Mr. DeGuerin?
The two exhibits that have been on the board, we don't have to put them up again. The personal note from Dr. Cook, the intervention that he took the next day on behalf of Kathy to tell the registrar she was withdrawing for personal reasons. Doesn't that change your assessment of whether it would be ludicrous for Kathy, say, to call the dean when she was having a problem starting a clerkship?
Your Honor, that misstates.
Overruled.
Objection has to do with problems starting a clerkship,
Over-
Your Honor.
overruled, you're making speaking objections, I'm overruling them. You may answer.
Can I have to understand something. There are,
You don't understand the question? It's a complicated question. Maybe you should break it down into smaller questions, Mr. DeGuerin. 3 questions would probably cover it a lot more efficiently than one long, complicated question.
Doesn't this change your assessment of whether it was ludicrous for Kathy Durst to call the dean when she couldn't make the first day of her clerkship?
no,
Does it have any effect on it?
no,
Did you know about this at all?
no.
So regardless of whether there was a relationship that Kathy Durst enjoyed with Dr. Cook, you wouldn't change your mind?
You,
That's a yes or no?
okay,
Your Honor, I'm gonna
I
ask
don't
the-
see, you're talking about two different people, or two different people have been mentioned, and now I'm confused, but you're talking about her calling Dr. Cooperman or speaking with Dr. Cook?
The evidence is that she called Dr. Cook, and Dr. Cook was out of town, and the call was routed to Dr. Cooperman.
I find it ludicrous that you would ask those questions that is not a question. That she told him how she was feeling is not a question. She wasn't asking permission. I have diarrhea and a headache. Is it okay for me not to come in?
Well, where do you get that? Is that what you have come to believe about what was in the phone call with Dr. Cooperman?
Asking permission?
Have you, you were not, clear this up, you were not part of the phone call that Dr. Cooperman took on the morning of February 1st, 1982, were you?
I was not.
So all you know about that is what you've been told by somebody else.
Correct.
And so I'm taking from your answer, you've been told that it wasn't a call for permission to miss the clerkship?
Okay, I'm going to intervene here. The only thing that's relevant is the hypothetical question which is posed to her. The hypothetical question is different from what you're describing now. So focus on the hypothetical that was actually presented, not what some other witness might have testified to or will testify to.
Well, the hypothetical question includes assuming Kathy Durst had a personal relationship with Dr. Cook. Dr. Cook having previously bailed her out.
That again, this is testimony.
Well, that's
by Mr.
colloquialism.
DeGuerin. It misstates the evidence and it assumes a fact, not an evidence, Your Honor.
I think it does. I think it's an improper hypothetical for that reason. So I'll sustain the objection.
Assuming that Kathy Durst had previously had a relationship with Dr. Cook, in which Dr. Cook wrote the registrar that she would withdraw from the surgery clerkship for personal reasons.
The objection is to the characterization of relationship, Your Honor. He can ask what the doctor did, not characterize what he believes it was, and then.
Well, I'll overrule it. It's subject to inference. I mean, you could draw you could draw that inference, so that's fine. You can then combat that
You know
inference.
what, I'll just withdraw it. It's not even
Right,
worth
right.
it.
It's
not worth it. I'll just withdraw it.
Well, I think it is worth it, John. Thank you.
okay. Let's go ahead.
Why I withdrew the objection.
I get you.
Okay.
Okay, go ahead. Ask a question.
Assume, please, ma'am, that in the past,
The first two words were mumbled, I couldn't
Okay.
hear them.
Again,
assume, please, ma'am, that in the
Doctor.
past,
yeah, the doctor is appropriate.
Dr. Cook had told the registrar that Kathy Durst couldn't make the beginning of a clerkship because of personal reasons. Assume that Dr. Cook reached out to Kathy Durst the day before he made that statement or that letter to the registrar. And assume further that Kathy called Dean Cook on February the 1st, 1982, but was routed to Dean Cooperman because Dean Cook was out of town. And assume further that Dean Cooperman was expecting the call. Does that change your assessment that it was ludicrous to think she would call the dean?
What, if the dean expected a phone call from her?
I've asked you to assume that.
Your Honor, I
Doctor,
believe at this point that's an improper hypothetical based on the evidence.
It's in Dean Cooperman's testimony.
It is.
Right, I think that's an inference you could draw from it. It may be confused, but assume that for this hypothetical. I'll allow that.
Your Honor, is the witness being asked to assume that he's expecting a call and then to be asked if the call surprises? In other words, it would seem to be,
I don't know, I haven't heard the last part.
that's what,
I've asked my question. I asked her if that would change her assessment that it was ludicrous to expect that a medical student would call the dean.
So the question-
Instead of the internship, instead of the placement.
you know, but the question now is assuming that Dean Cooperman is expecting a call, would it still be ludicrous if he got a call? That's what that ends up being.
Right.
So the statement itself, it's improper hypothetical because the hypothetical itself assumes the very fact that you're asking about. So it is either A, an improper hypothetical, B, it would call for speculation, C, it's an argumentative question, and
Okay.
D, it's irrelevant for the other three reasons.
A, B, C, D.
Yeah, I think I get all the above, Your Honor, actually.
I'll let that set for a second.
If Dean Cooperman were expecting her call, would it be ludicrous for her to call?
I'm sorry, Dean
If
Cooperman
Dean
what?
Cooperman were expecting her call, would it be ludicrous for her to call him? That's a sort of a separate hypothetical.
If
I'm
he
trying to
was-
get to, if Dean Cooperman were expecting a call
A call
from her,
from-
would it be ludicrous for her to call? I think that's self-evident. I'm not gonna
I
ask
mean,
her
that's
that.
kind of silly question.
Same
Right.
objection, Your Honor.
Right, right.
Silly was not a ground, but
This
if it
is
were,
reductio ad absurdum.
I would
Is,
have used it.
Yeah. Yes, it's the questions, I'm gonna sustain the objection.
What was your assessment of how Kathy was doing in school in late 1981, early 1982? Well, let's take it 80, 81, and 82.
Well,
It's not in
I
that memo.
never looked at anybody else's grades or their evaluations, so I can't, I don't know.
So you
What
didn't-
was mine? I didn't have one. I didn't look for one.
So you didn't know how she was doing?
No.
Did you know her, how often would you see her? Late
During
1981.
class, when we were having classes, the first 2 years, I would see her every day.
How about the next 2 years, particularly in later 1981? How often
So-
did you see her?
In 1981, we had something called Back to Science or something like that, and we went from doing our clinical rotations back into the classroom for some period of time. So during that period, I would have seen her every day. The other students, you might, obviously, if they're on the same rotation as you would see them. If they were on other rotations, but in the same hospital, you would often see them.
Yes, ma'am, but I'm asking you about Kathy Durst. Let's start in late 1980. How often did you see her, let's say, in the month of November?
Of 1980,
Yes, ma'am. Are you looking at some notes?
I'm counting on my fingers.
Okay.
Late 1980. I don't know how frequently that I saw her.
Did you see her frequently enough to know whether she was in ill health in November of 1980?
Just seeing somebody doesn't mean that you know what their medical condition is.
Well, you said that it would be, you'd have to be very ill in order to miss class because of the feelings around medical school and the competition and so forth. That was your testimony, wasn't
You
it?
know,
The
I-
culture, I think.
okay, I think that I didn't understand when you were saying medical problems, that could include the brain, but it does. So if somebody is having, severe mood disorder or something else that's a brain disease, could that affect their performance? Definitely, yes.
That wasn't my question. I'm trying to determine whether you were around Kathy enough in, say, the November of 1980 to know whether she was in ill health, such ill health that would cause her to miss clerkships.
One can be around somebody every minute of one day and not know that that person was suffering from a severe illness.
It's your statement that the illness would have to be very severe in order to miss a clerkship. Is that your statement?
Yes.
Let me show you the first page of Exhibit C.
Yes, of course.
Hello,
She's, got it?
Exhibit C. There we go. This is a student evaluation for the radiology clerkship, and I'll just focus on the narrative evaluation. On the screen, it says, Ms. Durst was unable to attend a large part of the clerkship, mostly due to ill health. Did I read that correctly?
Yes.
So, again, my question to you is, when you were with Kathy in November of, anytime in November of 1980, did she appear to you to be in such ill health that she had to, was unable to attend a large part of the clerkship? That's a simple question. Did
No,
she?
it's a very complicated question.
Well, did she appear to you to be in such ill health that she couldn't go to school?
You may answer the question.
You cannot know by looking at somebody whether their health is so badly that they can't function in a clerkship. Sometimes you could, of course, sometimes you could, but I think many things are not, many problems with health are not easily observable or observable at all.
But of course, you could tell that she was, Bob Durst was domineering from a 10-minute encounter on the street.
That I could tell what?
That misstates the testimony. She didn't claim Mr. Durst was anything. She described the interaction.
It's cross. She can explain it again that that's not what you said.
Are you making a statement or asking me a question?
I'm asking you a question.
What is the question, sir?
Well, you have testified that you were able to decide that Bob Durst was domineering from a 10-minute.
No, I never
encounter.
said that, sir.
All right. Well, let's. Did you see Kathy Durst enough in November of 1980 to make a judgment whether she was too ill to go to class? Yes or no?
It's not a yes or no answer. I can't answer.
Your Honor?
Yes, she says she can't answer that.
Well, if you
That's
can't
her
answer
answer.
it, that's an answer.
Yes, that is an answer.
Let's see the next page. This is a memoranda dated July the 14th. It's from the same doctor. You've not completed, and therefore your evaluation remains as deferred. That's the radiology clerkship. And you've, in spite of repeated memos and telephone calls, you've not contacted us. Did you know any of this was going on with Kathy Durst in July of 1981?
I did not.
Page 3. A evaluation from Dr. Hubbard, who was head of the neurology clerkship. Kathleen unfortunately had an illness in her family and was unable to complete the clerkship. In July of 1981, were you close enough to Kathy to know whether she had an illness in her family or not?
I did not know that. No, I didn't know, no.
All right. So you really weren't very close to Kathy, were you? Do you have to think about that?
I wasn't close enough to know those things about her, no.
And so you weren't close enough to really say that it would be ludicrous for her to call the dean.
Well, you know,
Right.
the other thing is that
Excuse me, that's not responsive.
Well, yeah, it is. You may explain.
you can live with a spouse and not know what's going on with them. It depends on what somebody, reveals to you for various reasons, and there are many things that go on that are not observable.
My question was, you really didn't know Kathy very well, did you?
Did I not know her very well? Did I not know her very well? No, I feel like I knew her, yeah.
But you didn't know her well enough to know whether illness in her family was an excuse that she made up for missing the radiology clinic or clerkship. You didn't know her well enough to know that, right?
Well, are you telling me that she did?
Well, that's what this says. That's what that,
No, it says that she had an illness in her family. I don't know if that was true or not. You don't know either, do you?
well, you don't ask questions, but yes, I do. And there's no evidence that she had an illness in her family.
Your Honor, we will stipulate to that if Mr. DeGuerin would
Okay,
like.
well, we'll work out your stipulation.
Okay, we now have a stipulation.
There was no illness in her
That-
family.
She-
Okay, well, that's fine. Let's leave that for another time, and let's take,
So
finish the
apparently it's
balance
not
of our
good-
time with this witness. which
So
is how
apparently
much.
it's not been contested that there was no illness in her family, and that's just an excuse to Dr. Hubbard.
Is that a question for me?
Yes, it's about your knowledge about whether she had an illness in her family. Did you know anything about any illness in her family?
I did not.
And did you know anything about her being too sick to attend a large part of the radiology clerkship?
No,
All right,
I did not.
thank you, that's all.
Can I just point something out here, Judge?
No, let Mr. Lewin ask you if you could point something out.
Okay.
Mr. Lewin, you may have a condensed
I
redirect.
mean, I'm reading something on this report that,
Your
let-
Honor,
let-
would you explain to the witness she's not here just
I'll
to make
take-
a speech?
I got this, Mr. DeGuerin.
So Mr. Lewin's going to ask you that question right now, and then you can explain.
Okay.
Mr. Lewin, go ahead and ask, if you wish.
Doctor, I'm gonna go through a few questions here, so I know what I need to ask you, so just, if you can, just listen to my questions. My first question is, in your experience, is it unusual?
What?
In your experience, is it unusual for victims of domestic violence to make up other excuses as to why they cannot do things, go places, etc., when they are being beaten at home?
That's, he's asking her to speculate that that's the reason for her giving those excuses. There's no basis for that. We object to it.
Overruled. You may answer.
Can you repeat the question?
You
is
answer the question.
is it something that a victim might do?
Yes.
Yes.
And in your 40 years as a psychiatrist, is it unusual for a woman, particularly one who is a professional in medical school, to be ashamed that she's being beaten and abused at home by her husband?
That's argumentative,
Overruled.
leading.
Overruled.
It is
I
not
guess it's
legal.
expert testimony at this point, so
Overruled. Overruled. You may answer that question.
Let me ask it again, ma'am. Is it unusual, based on your 40 years as a psychiatrist, for a victim of domestic violence, particularly one who is a professional, to lie and make up excuses as to why she cannot show up to different commitments because she's embarrassed or humiliated by the violence she's suffering?
I think that would be likely.
Now, you were asked questions about the encounter that you had with Mr. and Mrs. Durst, and you were asked where you were in Manhattan, etc. Was what was memorable where you were standing, what side of the park you were on, or the actual interaction you observed?
It was a nice day, that I remember.
No, Doctor, what I'm asking is, what is memorable for you? Where you were standing when you saw it, or what you actually saw?
The interaction.
The interaction when you said Mr. DeGuerin has described it as simply Bob Durst saying, "We're going to get some crab." Was there more to what he said that made you believe this was an effort by him at controlling his wife?
Leading.
Oral. You may
Um, communication is mostly not words. It's how they're given and how they're received by the other person. So, were there other words that he said? No, but not that I can remember. No.
So your position is that, given your 40 years of experience now as a psychiatrist and looking back on the interaction, that the way the interaction took place led you to believe that Mr. Durst was exercising a dominating, controlling attitude with his wife?
It was my observation that was the interaction right then.
I want to ask you, you were shown clerkships, and they showed, for instance, it said missed a large part of the clerkship due to illness. Do you know if that's the real reason? As you sit here today, do you know what the reason was that Kathy Durst missed time in the clerkship? You were further shown a letter on March 9th, 1981. This was a letter that Dean Cook sent to Kathy asking if he could help her. And my question to you is, does the fact that a dean is reaching out to a medical student, I want you to assume that that dean had been contacted by the rotation that the student was on, that Kathy was on, and the attending had said that Kathy had said to him that my husband is very violent, he's homicidal, and she basically fell apart in the rotation, and that was reported to Dr. Cook. I want you to assume all that. Does it then surprise you that Dr. Cook would reach out to Kathy?
No.
Does that show to you in any way a, quote, personal relationship between the two of them?
No.
So unless we're going to have this witness back again tomorrow, we need to constrain our questioning.
And I am, Your Honor, I'm just about done. In fact, this is going to be my last question. Mr. DeGuerin has stated to you that you weren't close enough to Kathy Durst. Do you recall him saying that?
No, that's not a way to say
Yeah,
that.
rephrase that, please. The question was how
Miss-
well, if he
Yeah.
knew her well
Yeah.
enough to know
Mi-
this fact.
Mr. DeGuerin has basically, in his question to you, has insinuated that you did not have a very close relationship with Kathy Durst. Do you recall the question that he asked you? Do you recall that?
Yes.
And I want to ask you, did you have a close enough relationship with Kathy Durst so that the first question I asked you today, that your response was to begin crying, thinking about her?
What was your first question to me? I don't remember.
No, I mean, do you remember what you did when I asked about Kathy Durst? What did
Yes.
you do?
I cried.
I have no further questions.
Mr. DeGuerin,
No.
may the witness be excused?
Yes.
Yes, Your Honor, thank
Doctor,
you.
you're excused, thank you. Great, ladies and gentlemen, tomorrow, I believe we will start at 9 o'clock. So I'm going to ask you to return at that time. Do not talk about the case or about any of the people or any subject, there it is, involved in it with anyone. I feel like the great Oz, suddenly I've got a booming voice. Right, Darth Vader. With this getup, I suppose I am. Including the other jurors. Do not make up your mind about the verdict or any issue until after you've discussed the case with the other jurors during deliberations. We'll see you tomorrow at 9 o'clock. Yep.